Did you ever win any awards when you were in high school or maybe even college? Things like most handsome. Joe? Yeah. Yes. I see that hand. Most beautiful. Most athletic, maybe. Valedictorian, probably some of those. Salutatorian. Most likely to succeed. I don't think they give that one out anymore. I didn't win in any of those categories. Oh well. Although I may have mentioned before, in my high school class of 78's prophecy, it was predicted or prophesied that because of me, 2 of my classmates would become multimillionaires. It seemed that they bought me for what I was worth and sold me for what I thought I was worth. When you read the Bible, there are lots of underdog stories. You remember Jacob, the younger, weaker twin son of Isaac. He had to trick his older brother to out of his father's blessing to get ahead. And then there was Jacob's son, Joseph, the baby of the family, who was always being picked on by his 11 older brothers, but he came out on top. Moses was a bit of an underdog. He started out really pretty privileged, but by the time God called him, all he had basically was a stick and a stuttering problem. Certainly David wasn't favored in the battle against Goliath. And then there was Elijah, and the odds were about 300-1 in his battle, but you know how that went, right? We talked about Job recently. It seemed that to Job that even God was against him, but he still came out on top, sort of. Gideon had a good-sized army to begin with, but he whittled it down to just 300 men and went to battle against thousands. Can you imagine the Vegas odds? What would have been offered for that? When it came to success, none of these folks had much of a chance. I think you would agree with that. And there are other examples of not just biblical accounts of underdogs and that sort of thing, but things in our own lifetime and in culture. You remember the 1980 Winter Olympics and the miracle on ice, where the United States men's hockey team needed a miracle to beat the heavily favored Russian team, and they got that miracle. You know the story, you may have even met, some of you, Rudy Rudiger, who had determined to play college football at Notre Dame, and the odds against him being so small were astronomical, but he did it. Hollywood loves underdog stories. Rocky, Hoosiers, the Karate Kid. And there was this lady who lost her mother to multiple sclerosis, and she went into a difficult marriage, had a miscarriage, domestic abuse, it was reported, finally got a divorce and became a single mother, but she was jobless and diagnosed with depression and contemplating suicide. She wanted to be a writer, but every publisher that she went to rejected her. Finally, one agreed to publish a book that was the first in the Harry Potter series. My favorite, maybe underdog story, because of just how addicted I am to what he created, is Harlan Sanders. At age 65, took his chances with a chicken recipe that his friends thought was really good. And the legend has it that he was rejected 1,009 times before one restaurant said that they would fry the chicken his way. And so KFC, thankfully, exists for us today. And then Walt Disney, you know his story, failure after failure. His first cartoon, which we never got to see really, was Oswald the Rabbit. It was legally taken away from him, and it might have been even bigger than Mickey Mouse. But he lost Oswald. And then, of course, when Snow White came out, it was rejected by all the critics and even his animators. Some of them didn't want their names associated with it. He did okay. I can't really say for sure. I don't find any records in that, but I'll bet that none of these folks were voted most likely to succeed. And so I guess that puts us, most of us at least, in pretty good company, along with Ruth. Sandwiched between the book of Judges and 1 Samuel, there are 4 short chapters about a woman who, for all intents and purposes, shouldn't have even been mentioned in the Hebrew Bible. She was both the ultimate underdog and a very unintentional hero. Name was Ruth, and her simple faith changed the world. Our reading this morning tells us the beginning of the story of Ruth. I think we'll get to the rest of it next week. And most of us know this passage, or at least a small portion of it, because it's a favorite in wedding homilies. Now, the irony in that is that the text is set, that is so famous in wedding homilies, the text is set basically after a forbidden mixed marriage and immediately after the death of the husband involved. I mean, when you read the first chapter of Ruth, you, along with everyone else in your high school class, would vote Ruth as the least likely to succeed. And when it comes to marriage, the first chapter holds not even a hint of hope for a wedding for Naomi, who's heading home to face probably scorn and ridicule. And then for Ruth, who's an alien, going back to a place she's never been, who chooses to follow her, there's not much hope in those verses. But this story really goes back generations, all the way back to the account of Abraham and Lot, fleeing Sodom and Gomorrah before God destroys the place. And you remember Lot's wife turned back, and, well, you know how that turned out. Not good for her. But shortly thereafter, and pardon me if this part of the story is a little risque, because it doesn't come up in the lectionary very often. But shortly after that, maybe thinking that they were the only persons left in the world, and maybe just making bad decisions, Lot's two daughters determined to get their father drunk and get themselves pregnant by their father. And if you fast forward a little bit from there, and yes, you can read about that in Genesis 19 if you'd like. Like I said, it doesn't come up in the lectionary very often. But fast forward a little bit, and these two girls each have a son, one named as Ammon and one is Moab. And these two boys would grow up to father rival nations to the Israelites. And off and on, they were bitter enemies of the Israelites. They were called the Ammonites and the Moabites. The Moabites would settle in a land kind of southeast of the Dead Sea area and would excel in the worship of false gods, particularly Baal. Now, fast forward a bit more, and there's a famine in Bethlehem. It's interesting, the word Bethlehem in Hebrew means a couple of different things. It means, enough bread or God will provide. But there's a famine there. Naomi and her husband that Ken mentioned earlier, I won't try to pronounce his name since Ken did such a great job of pronouncing that name. I'm going to skip it. But Naomi and her husband, they leave looking for work, most likely. It's pretty likely that Naomi and her husband, sorry, Ken, Elimelech. Is that pretty close? Okay, whatever. They were not a wealthy family, more than likely. Otherwise, they might have been able to stay in Bethlehem. They were most likely farmers, maybe even sharecroppers of sorts. The bottom line is they were hungry, and there was no work, there was no food. There were no prospects in Bethlehem of things getting better. And so they moved to Moab. And sure enough, even there, things don't get better. The dad dies. Naomi is an alien in Moab. And her sons, though, find Moabite wives. And so they stay. And then tragedy strikes again. The sons die. Naomi has nothing. Compound that with the fact that Naomi's daughters have nothing either. They are all somewhat strangers in a strange land. The Moabite wives certainly are from there, but as Naomi is going to mention, and she says for them to go back to their mothers, the interpretation there is that they have no fathers. There's no head of the family in their lives. And so they really are in a difficult situation. No husbands. Not only that, they carry a stain of having married Israelite men. These two young ladies really have nowhere to go either. Naomi gets word, though, that the famine has lifted and that things are better back home in Bethlehem. And although Naomi knows that she will most likely not be welcomed back in with open arms back in Bethlehem, she doesn't have any choice. She has to go back. She's got to be willing to face the shame and the rumors and who knows what all else, having moved away to Moab of all places and then having to come back. And so she tells her daughters-in-law that she's going back, but they need to stay. There would be nothing good for them back in Bethlehem. But Ruth is committed to her dead husband's mother, and she utters these beautiful words: "Do not press me to leave you, to turn back from following you. Where you go, I will go. Where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God my God. Where you die, I will die, and there will I be buried. May the Lord do thus to me and more as well, if even death parts me from you." Now we're going to fast forward one more time. And Ruth, this alien Moabite widow, is the great-grandmother of King David. The name Ruth is mentioned 12 times in the book that bears her name, and then one more time in Matthew's Gospel, chapter 1, in the context of Christ's genealogy. Ruth is the ultimate underdog. She is easily the least likely to succeed. But, well, you know. Ruth's story, and we'll hear more next week, her story is the story of God, hidden and yet active in human life, hidden and yet active in our life. This is the God that brings about reversals, the God who turns barrenness into fertility, the God who turns death into rebirth. This constant working God acts through enemies, acts through struggles, and through those who are the least likely to matter, period. Now, if that sounds like anyone that you know, take heart, because that same God is our God. Thanks be to God. Amen.